All right, let's work on this final exam review. Number one, which quadratic inequality is graphed at the right? Notice that my solutions are at -1 and +3. That's gonna kind of affect my answer a bit. The other thing I want you to notice is the fact that this is a solid line and it's shaded below the solid line. By knowing those facts, I should be able to realize that this should be a less than or equal to graph. That would eliminate answer choice B, C, and D. But let's go ahead and confirm that these factors are in fact those solutions there. So x minus 3, set it equal to 0. X plus 1, set that equal to 0, and then solve. So 3 and -1 are those solutions, which checks out. My answer is A. Number 2 says write this equation in vertex form and then identify the vertex. Realize vertex form is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, where h and k actually represent the vertex. In order to do this, I'm going to try to complete the square. So I need to put my a and b terms inside the parentheses and the c term on the outside. To figure out how I get the third value that would go here, I need to do b divided by 2 and square it. So -18 divided by 2 is -9. Notice I put that in parentheses and I'm going to square it to get +81. If you don't use parentheses, then you're going to get something that doesn't quite work out for you. And you're going to think it's the right answer. So if you're using your calculator, just make sure to plug that in parentheses. So I'm going to have y equals, factor this part here in the side of this parentheses to get x minus 9 squared. Combine like terms here to get -29. And that's my equation in vertex form, but the question also asks to identify the vertex. And remember that the vertex is the h and k value. So the h is 9 and k is -29. So my final answer with the vertex included should be 9, -29. And don't forget, I changed that sign. If you notice, it looked like it was -9, but it's in fact +9 when I write my vertex. So just be aware of that. Number 3 says solve using any method. It's up to you to decide what to use, but I'm going to go ahead and factor because this one's going to be a nice clean answer if I factor it. X squared minus 3x. To factor, I need to make one side equal to 0, so I'm going to actually subtract 28 from both sides and have my factors here. What two numbers add up to -3 but multiply to give me 28? I'm going to have -7 and +4. X minus 7, x plus 4 equals 0. And notice, go back and check. It did say solve. It didn't just say factor. It said to solve. So I have to actually set each of those terms equal to 0. So x equals 7. And x equals -4. Other methods you might want to try on this are completing the square, which is going to be a little tricky since your value of b is in fact odd. Or you could use quadratic formula, which always works nice and pretty if you are sure of what you're doing there. Number 4 says identify the solutions of the quadratic function. Realize what solutions means. There's many different words for this. Solutions, x-intercepts, roots, and zeros. They all mean the same thing. So just make sure that you're aware of that whenever you're answering a question that asks you what are the solutions. So the solutions is where my graph crosses the x-axis. So I have 2 points here and here. So my solutions are going to be x equals -4 and x equals 0. Question 5 says, what is the equation of the table shown? So in order to do this, I would probably just use a quadratic regression. And this can be done in your calculator. So I'll just write those steps for you. To do a quadratic regression, I'm going to add a new document. Then I will do a listen spreadsheet. Of course, I have to type in X and Y at the top. X and Y. I have to label that at the top. And then I'm going to type in my X and Y values. I'll do menu, statistics, stat calculations, and choose quadratic regression. So this is menu 416 in your calculator. Change the X list, change the Y list, and then it'll give you A, B, and C. On this one, A is equal to -0.25, B is 1.5, and then C is -0.25. So my equation is y equals -0.25 x squared plus 1.5x minus 0.25. And that's something that I would do in my calculator on the exam. What is the domain and range for this function 4x squared minus 12x plus 9? Well, domain you can find by knowing that it's quadratic because of the power of 2. That makes this quadratic. Quadratics always have the same domain, which is -infinity to +infinity, or you can say all real numbers. For the range, the easiest way to find this would be to find your vertex. And you can do that in your calculator by graphing. So once I graph this in my calculator, it'll look something like this. And I will find my vertex using menu analyze graph. And find the minimum. I know this is a minimum because A is positive. So that minimum value is actually 1.5, 0. And the range is always the Y value to infinity because this is a minimum. So 0 to infinity for this one. For number 7, what is the solution to the system of 3 variables? Now, I can definitely put this one in my calculator as well. This would be under menu, algebra, and solve systems of linear equations. Or menu, as y'all say it, menu 3-2. And it's going to ask you how many equations are there. And it's going to automatically say 2. You have to change it to 3. And when you do, it's going to tell you -1, 3, -1. You have to realize that this means x is -1, y is 3, and then z is, again, -1. For this one, graph the following system of inequalities. To graph this, you have to, in your calculator, you can graph it in your calculator, and then you'll see how everything is shaded. Otherwise, I'm going to have to solve it by hand, get y alone on one side of the equal sign. So let's see. First, let's solve this one for y. X minus y is less than or equal to 2. I'm doing this because I don't have a calculator handy. But you can definitely just do this in your calculator. So y is greater than or equal to, I changed that sign because I divided by a negative, x minus 2. So -2, I'm going to go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. So I'm going to draw my graph here. And notice, but because it's equal to, I'm going to have a solid line. Let me go ahead and make that a little bit thicker. Solid line. Didn't mean to make it that thick, but that's all right. Next, I'm going to do this one here. X. Shade this above. The next one is x plus 2y is greater than or equal to -1. I'm going to solve for y. So I have 2y is greater than or equal to -x minus 1. Notice I'm not going to actually switch it because I didn't divide by negative. I divided by a positive. So -1/2 x minus 1/2. So I'm going to start at -1/2 and go down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2. This is something that if you had a calculator, you would be able to see in your calculator, so you wouldn't have to actually plot it by hand. But here's mine. Let's make that not quite as thick as I did last time. That was a bit too much. And again, it says greater than or equal to, so I do need to shade above. And for the third one, y is less than or equal to 2. That one's already solved, so I'm just going to find y and 2. And here it is. And it says less than, so I'm actually going to shade below this time. So here, just in this little piece. So by seeing that, we can see that the shape of this is a triangle. Triangle. Number 9, solve this system. This is done really similar to how number 7 was completed. So the same steps, menu 3, 2. And when I do this, I would get 0, -2, 2, which would mean x is 0, y is -2, and then z is +2.